Well, here we are again. Thanks for joining. We've got a really interesting guest here on Point today, Mr. Jonathan Jones from CBRE. Really excited because he's a young and aspiring facade engineer, and I've worked with him on a few jobs now, and he's really impressed me. So I'm looking to learn some real insights, and hopefully you will get some as well. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're, staying with the Point thing. Where's the potential, would you say, for, like if we're just talking radical and we're saying, like, let's change the industry, where's the biggest potential?
For who? Clients, or for the industry contractors or designers or end tenants? Where would you want the potential to be?
Let's go with let's be generous and just think about the people that own the buildings, because they're the one that have the biggest vested interest. So let's help them out. So where's the biggest potential that we see from our vantage point?
So I think, for asset owners, building owners, large portfolio managers and things, I think the technology is hopefully really going to streamline that management process for their portfolio of buildings, right? Like you said, buildings are getting smart, even smarter than they already are. BMS, building management systems, will eventually be able to manage the building on its own. Will you need FMs? Yes, you probably still need someone on the ground, but do you need people walking around the building checking your systems regularly, or robots doing it? I don't know. But this allows, I suppose, building managers to see the whole portfolio through one portal, one interface. We've done some things like this at CBRE where, you've surveys or various different services we've carried out for clients, and then put all that information into one portal so they can quickly see all their buildings, all the information, all the costs, everything in one place. And allows them to really manage their budget, manage their time, and targeted maintenance, as opposed to emails on emails, talking to them, trying to get things sorted out. So I think that for clients is going to be the biggest thing. Massive cost saver in the, streamlining of resources, so to speak, which is
So the one thing that I'm sort of seeing clients ask more is, where is the hockey stick of, it's breaking down, it's holding, it's breaking down, and then all of a sudden it's like very slowly and then very quickly everything starts breaking down. And I think that's from what we're seeing is that the more efficient a building is and the more it's maintained, the longer its lifespan is. But some of the, like you're working and we're working on iconic buildings, and we're also working with them for years, and you just think, it's almost, you have a sense of responsibility to keep them going rather than, there's always that sort of faction that says, just tear them down, put something new in. That, when you look at London, and I look at data, so I logged into a system with CoStar that gives me access to more or less everything that's happening in the UK and America. And when I look at I thought there was a small niche of buildings which are 25 years and over. And just in the square mile, there's 11,000 really good quality buildings that are over the 25-year-old threshold. And I've had this conversation many times now with especially in the city, like when they were designed, as you said, 70s, 80s, the landscape was very different, and the weather patterns through the forget the sort of the macro stuff, but the micro weather patterns are changing, because if you go down, say, Bishopsgate, like some of those huge buildings that have gone up are now funneling all the way down, and it's like long corridors, and they must have an effect and an impact on, capping systems or gasketry or louvers or copings even. I'm seeing a lot of coping, when we get these big weathers come through, not tornadoes, but, big gusts, that can whip through. I mean, we're seeing gusts now 50, 60 as through London as a sort of, which was never heard of 5, 6 years ago.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. We did some work last year over in the US in inspecting some different types of buildings, some like large industrial sites and things. Some of those were located in kind of let me get my geography right, central to kind of Southeast America or Central America, where tornadoes do happen and hurricanes, and looking at the wind loading. They're very interesting over in the United States. They have different codes depending on which state and where it was designed and things like this. But looking how they were designed originally to modern standards and how the wind and like tornadoes have been, designed in, it's really interesting. And your point on funneling kind of in London, funneling is included in the wind loading calculations. So any new buildings that are built will be taken into this account. Much older buildings might not have, and if the environment is changing around them, do those design needs to be revisited? It's an interesting question, and people are starting to look at this. Like I said, we've done some work for clients where we have reviewed that, but it's very design orientated, and kind of interestingly, the drivers mostly come from insurance, so
Right,
kind of who's going to pay if it gets damaged, who's going to look after it, and things like that.
I'm surprised that insurance aren't more. I mean, everyone's insurance premiums have gone through the roof, and I mean, we've started to do more of this sort of non-combustible and reclad work, which we've got involved in before together. But that as a result push it, our premiums have gone mad, and yet I don't see much from the insurance people taking an interest, saying, okay, well, if you mitigate, if you do this, then your insurance premiums could come down. Do you ever get involved in any of those conversations?
Yeah. So we have some projects on the go where there is remedials required, because fire being one of the main drivers and things like that. And insurance is part of that conversation, in terms of the work we're doing, how that affects the insurance premiums. If we do A or if we do B, both are compliant with the regulations. Perhaps A is a further step than the regulations. Is that what the insurance wants, or are they happy with B, which meets the regulations? Which is an interesting conversation where you already have a set of rules or regulations, if you like, that govern what is safe and what isn't. And then you have an insurance provider saying, no, we want more. We need that. We need more than what you're only doing. This would be better, and we can lower your premiums even further. It's a really, before moving to CBRE, knew nothing about this, know, and coming from the design world, this whole commercial real estate is a whole new part of the industry, which is really interesting for me and very different to what I learned previously, I guess.
So because you were at Eckersley Callahan.
Yeah, so my background, I studied in Cardiff University and then came to London, kind of fell into facade engineering. I think a lot of people do, and kind of worked at design firms, at Eckersley Callahan being one of them, and did contractor for a bit, for a main contractor, which was interesting and fun. I don't envy you guys. And then I've moved back into the consultancy life, and joined CBRE. So yeah, my background is really kind of early stage design, REBA stages kind of 2 through to 4, and then contractor monitoring in kind of 5. And now I'm a lot more involved in kind of, operational stages, and kind of end of life of buildings and remedials, which is a completely different aspect. And all the conversations with, as we said before, the big funds that own these buildings, they're quite different conversations than you have in the design stage. And interestingly, I think that's where a lot of problems maybe in buildings we see come from, that sort of disconnect between the design stages of a project, contractor picks it up, and then, the operational life, and kind of all this design team, they're kind of lost, they're kind of gone. The things like Golden Thread and BIM, and they're all trying to get pulled into the industry to, I think help this process, because for me, from my experience, that's kind of where I see things falling down, really. Which is
No, I mean that I think that's probably the biggest growth part of the industry, which is that end of life. I think working it backwards, when 15686, when that is part of the design process, and that's where everyone says that's where you get your 60 years of life and warranty, and no one ever revisits that calculation. No one ever says, right, okay, this is what we designed it to. It's now been built to that. Give it to the operator and say, make sure that the O&Ms and everything else are carried through. And I think if they did, the quality of the buildings, when they're maintained and operated, would be, like they were number one, save money, and they would just last longer. And feeding into that end of life material banks. I'm seeing, I'm having conversations with. Recently, I know hopefully will be a guest, Mr. Entwistle, and Saint-Gobain are doing a lot with recycling glass, decarbonisation. A lot of the people that are doing demolishing are bringing back some of that glass for colour, and it really does feel like a sort of recycling that's going on. But even before that, reusing what is already on the building and reportioning it to different parts of the building with just some, most of the curtain wall systems are great, but the gaskets are gone. After 25 years, they're just brittle and they're not doing their job. And I part of my conversation with a lot of people is educating and saying, look, you don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's just do some changes. Glass in itself will last a long time, but the sealed unit and the makeup and the argon or whatever is gone out of it, and I know people like Arabs are getting involved in that whole that discussion as well, which is good to hear. So sort of saving the planet. Everyone talks about it, but there is Save the Planet in action, and I think actually our part of the industry, because it is the skin of the building, so and talking to people about skin, like you wouldn't treat your skin and just go into the blaring sun and all the elements with some kind of protection. I've got vitiligo, so I have to be I'm really conscious of that. But and you wouldn't take your car, you wouldn't just drive your car to death. You'd have an MOT, you'd get it checked out, you'd get it regularly repaired. And it seems that the facade or the skin of the building is not really thought about.
Yeah.
People are looking at M&Es and chillers and decarbon and degassing, but no one's thinking, actually, all my elements are coming out and all my energy is, coming out of the building, and all the elements are affecting that facade. So, I think that will. I am actually I'm just seeing that discussion accelerating constantly, and I think we're in the space, and I think. I know that's what you guys are seeing on a regular basis as well.
Yeah, I mean, facades, your point on facades are always considered last, so to speak, or, it's at the back of, building managers and facility managers' minds and landlords' minds. I fully agree with, we do see this a lot where like I said at the start, the sort of the bare minimum is done to ensure the facade is still on the building and the building envelope performs. But in terms of, like you said, gaskets, when they start to fail and go brittle, this does affect the performance. And unless the tenants in a building, particularly in offices, unless they, noticeably feel an impact, they're not going to address it. And what we find is, with management contracts, when you have a multi-tenanted building or multi-let building, different companies on different levels, the facade responsibility, the upkeep of that sits with the landlord, and can sometimes kind of go by the wayside, and you've got that paired with a city like London. You've got a lot of complex buildings very close together. The access, as you well know, how to get to these locations, how to actually clean elements, how to maintain them, how to replace. We've got some great fun projects with glass replacements on the go. How that actually functions is a really interesting one, and I think it is a frustration, I think, sometimes to feel, especially because we're in facades, no one else seems to care. It does feel like that. But I wonder how, how do you engage with your clients and get them to think more about the facade?
Yeah, I mean, what we're seeing is it's more. I used to sort of like go and prod and just say, and just say, "Did you know? You've got a crack in your facade," and they go, "No," or whatever we saw, or it'd be a window cleaner that says. I've told the client, and he's not done anything about it. But I've started to see water come into the building. But actually, these days I'm seeing because of the energy assessments. So we're getting called in saying, look, we're spending X amount on energy. What can you do about it? And that's, I think, where I think their technology piece has assisted us because you can't immediately a building that's 10,000 square meters. You're weeks on a building on BMUs or MUPs. Whereas with a drone, you can do a heat map on it really quickly or relatively quickly. And the quality of the visuals are so good now, so that you can do desktop reviews after. If you marry that in with a hybrid or even sample hybrid of people up and touching it and doing a sort of tactile survey, I think that's really complementary. So that sort of seems to be driving for us is people get a sense of, my God, my energy bills have gone through the roof. We know that we're getting condensation. We know that you can physically stand by the window and touch the panels or whatever, and it feels really cold, even though it's we're pumping it at 24 degrees. What can we do about it? That unveils various different things. Is poorly insulated. Sometimes it might even find other things that people don't want to know about, like fire breaks and things like that. But often, when you have a good look around, there's moss, and that tells you there's water in the system. And if there's water in the system, your units are sitting in the system, which means you're accelerating its death rate.
Yeah.
So that's in answer to your question. We're being asked on a more regular basis. Can you have a look at how can we improve the efficiency of the facade? And there's all the tools and tricks that we both know of what to do that. So you have to do an assessment first, I think, and I think that's it's no longer a hard sell to say have a survey, have an asset condition, do an assessment. It's not just about doing air leakages to get it past the building control. It's about how about regularly checking that type of thing, because there is such risk associated with it. I mean, buildings that we don't need to mention, but there are constantly things falling off buildings in London as a result of bad maintenance. It might be bimetallic corrosion that's or whatever's going on in the building. So we're now actively saying to clients, look, let's start with a condition survey. And then we can bring, and when it gets technical, then we can work. People like yourselves just say, like, this is what we found. Can you have oversight on that? What would you recommend? Work with us, collaborate with us. Whereas before it used to be. Everyone was very insular. Now I think when you get to and maybe it's just the size of building or maybe it's experience, but I think there's a lot of collaboration that's going on between energy assessors, people that are decarbonising, consultancies, people like us who are actually doing the work and sort of like bridging a little bit of expert experiential influence actually on the building, saying, well, look, you don't need a consultant for this. It's clear where it's coming in, and this is what you need to do. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, I mean, it is an interesting point. I think trying to engage with building managers and getting that initial survey, I think is quite key. And the use of modern technologies, you mentioned drones and things like that. I think that's the way we're seeing, because that allows us to bring down costs bring down fees for the client, improve health and safety. If I'm not in a BMU, a building management unit, or in a cherry picker, close up to the facade, instead there's a high definition camera on the ground taking thousands of images, which create a very high definition picture of an elevation. it's a far better way to, get that initial survey and initial look at and try to identify, high risk and problematic areas, which then we can engage further with. And, no, like I said, facades are always thought about last. So I think it's important to say, yeah, maybe you don't have to do anything with your facade, but let's have a quick look for you and see where you might have problematic areas. And then we can bring in the right people, whether you need more technical support from ourselves, whether you need contractors on board, or whether you just, you need someone to clean a thing. It allows us to provide that initial guidance at a much better fee level and safer. So I'm really interested with the technologies, the cameras. We had some really cool documentation sent over from a drone company for a building, to do a full drone survey of a building. The fee point was really, really attractive compared to what it would cost to pay, someone like yourself or me to be in a cherry picker for months going over a building. And then the use of AI on the back of that to, look at those pictures.
You still need us.
I give it 10 more years and they won't. Which is, for me, it's a really good point. It's interesting. Are we going to be replaced by AI? What do you think in AI?
I think it's something that I was listening to